Hi there. I'm Zach Ackerman. I serve on Ann Arbor City Council and represent the 3rd Ward, which is Ann Arbor's southeast side of town. Today, I want to share with you some exciting developments about what's going on in affordable housing in our Ann Arbor and Washtenaw County communities. I hope you'll enjoy the presentation and be moved to act, especially to exercise your vote on November 3rd, 2020. When I was first elected to City Council in 2015, something became very apparent to me very quickly, and that is that we have a tremendous professional staff at City Hall. We have exceptional basic services and good infrastructure for the state of Michigan. We win awards for fiscal stewardship of our budget, which we balance every year. We win awards for our drinking water and send our water treatment staff down to Congress to testify. And we have award-winning parks that make sure that every Ann Arbor resident lives within a quarter of a mile of a public park facility. But I did realize that we don't do some of the exceptional things very well. We don't do some of the equitable things very well. And one of those areas is an underinvestment in affordable housing. That's not to say we've completely fallen short. There have been dramatic wins over the last 7 years, and I want to share some of those with you and talk a little bit about what we need to be the community we believe we are. I hope you'll learn something and I hope you'll enjoy it. Whenever we talk about affordable housing, I think it's really important that we start with understanding the values behind it. Why should we care? Why is this important to our community? I think first we want to talk about the human impact. This is Charmaine. Charmaine is one of our neighbors, and she's been able to do incredible things. She's been able to get an associate's degree from Washtenaw Community College and is launching an entrepreneurial career, starting her own business. Charmaine also lives in an Avalon housing property, which she was able to use as a platform of safe, secure, and stable housing in order to launch her education and now her new business. When she reflects on what having access to a housing support meant to her, she also reflects that the ability to keep her daughters safe and secure and give them a stable home as one of the most important elements of her access to Avalon Housing's tremendous resources. I think the other reason we should care is our values. I did an exercise of scraping all of the values and principles that the institutions in our community hold dear or claim to hold dear. So from the University of Michigan to our hospital systems, to our civic leaders, to our biggest employers and economic drivers, all of them hold dear diversity, inclusion, and justice as core principles. I think that that's because those represent our values as a community. Their customers, their patients, their constituents, their employees all proclaim that diversity, inclusion, equity, and justice are central to who we see ourselves being. And housing is a central tenet to our ability to live out those values. And we'll get more into the numbers and the specifics of why that is. But for now, I truly believe that. I believe too we have a legacy of promoting these values. We were the birthplace of the anti-Vietnam War movement. We were the birthplace of the Human Rights Party. I think we hold these things on our sleeves. I think we have the biggest hearts and the best intentions. And now we need to live those values by becoming a more inclusive and accessible community. And then the last pillar of why I believe we should care is the impact to our economy. I think the effects of COVID-19 have laid bare just how fragile our global, our national, our regional, and our local economies can be. Essential workers, the people who work behind the scenes at hospitals, the people who bag our groceries, the people who deliver our essentials to our doorstep, these are folks on whom we depend, but who we keep out of our community because they can't afford the housing that's available here. If we want a resilient economy that can survive crisis, if we want a blossoming, thriving economy that's doing great in times of growth, we need to make sure that people who work all types of jobs have access to our community. So what's the situation on the ground? I think there's some base level information that we need to share. And I think the best way to do it is to share some headlines from news stories at the national level, the state level, and the local level. Nationally, before the COVID outbreak and the economic tension and depression that's resulted, we were actually in the midst of a housing crisis that no one was talking about, no one really knew about. In the United States, before COVID's impacts, which have only exaggerated the negative effects of our housing crisis, every 4 minutes, an American family was evicted from their home. Every 4 minutes. Think about the staggering impact. Think about the scale of that pain and that suffering. That every 4 minutes, a local sheriff's office was showing up to someone's house and removing them from their home simply because they couldn't keep up with their bills. That's a tragedy that we're living and we're experiencing. In Michigan, that problem is just as bad, if not worse. In Michigan, every month before COVID, again, exaggerated these issues, 17,000 evictions happened every single month. Again, that's a staggering scale of suffering. That's a staggering scale of economic instability that puts us all at risk. And then the result at a local level is really impactful. In a community like Ann Arbor, where we have really high-paying jobs, we have a research university, a budding tech industry, a major hospital, we create segregation when we don't have enough affordable housing for people of all walks of earth to enjoy and to call home. So Ann Arbor's actually become the 8th most segregated city or community in the nation. And this study actually took all of our metropolitan area into account, which is most of Washtenaw County. And what that really means is that Ann Arbor gets whiter and more wealthy, and the rest of the county is where we send our poor. And frankly, that's what that means. And then the effects are really dramatic. So we are responding with affordable housing to some degree. It's just not enough. And so one of the ways in which we promote affordable housing is by administering federal vouchers. Federal vouchers come to us from the Department of Housing and Urban Development at the federal level, at the state level through an entity called MISHDA, as well as through the Veterans Affairs Department in Washington, D.C. And we administer these vouchers on their behalf. We have thousands of people applying for these vouchers, and not nearly enough to give people a stable home. We also have affordable housing that we build ourselves. As the city, we build it through the Ann Arbor Housing Commission. That's our public housing or affordable housing entity. And we also have amazing nonprofit partners like Avalon Housing, the Michigan Ability Partners, and Habitat for Humanity, who also build housing and secure housing for folks of all walks of earth. And then we also, when we can, encourage private developers to include affordable housing in their properties. This is an example when 8 affordable housing units became available in a private development. And the county helps us to administer a wait list so that people can online get applied for this housing. The last time that we released 8 units were available, seemingly overnight, we had hundreds of applications and only 8 units of housing to fill. The need far outweighs the supply right now. And we're becoming more segregated and less equitable and less inclusive every single year. So what does affordable housing really mean? I think it can become a buzzword. It can become a value statement. It can become empty. And it's not. It's actually very tangible, it's very specific, and it's very easy to understand. If housing is affordable, it should cost no more than 30% of a household's income. Transportation should cost no more than 15% of a household's income. So together, you should not be spending more than 45% of your income on rent, your mortgage, or your car loan, car repairs, gas, bus, etc. Now, there are ways that you can bring down your housing costs by living further away from work or the economic center that is Ann Arbor. But that increases your transportation cost because your dependence on your car increases, the amount of gas you have to buy increases, the wear and tear that requires maintenance increases. And that has an effect on increasing your transportation cost. So I think what I want to leave with you on this slide is that affordable housing has a very specific definition, and it scales depending on who you are and how much money you earn. The definition of affordable housing changes for you as an individual. And I should add too, that this is something that's agreed upon by every presidential administration going back to Clinton. So Democrats, Republicans, academics, as well as practitioners, experts in the field building affordable housing, everyone agrees with this definition. So what does that really mean here in Ann Arbor? The best way to discuss the amount of money that people make at a large scale is to use the unit called Area Median Income, or AMI. In Washtenaw County, the area median income is $59,000, just over. In Ann Arbor, it's actually inflated by about 10,000, again, because we're a more affluent community. So it's about $69,000, almost 70. So in Washtenaw County, if you make the median income, which means you're the middle of the road individual, you can afford rent of about $1,400 a month. That $1,400 a month buys you access to 88% of the available units in Washtenaw County and about 70% of the units in Ann Arbor. So if you make $59,000, again, the median for the area, you're in pretty good shape. You can find housing most likely. As we go one tier down to 60% of the area median income, that's $35,500 a year, you can afford about $800 a month in rent. That dramatically decreases your ability to find housing in Ann Arbor and Washtenaw County. In the county, that salary buys you access to only 28% of the available units. In Ann Arbor, it's only 19%. Dramatically lower chances of finding affordable housing if you make only 60% of the median income. And then finally, when that picture is 30% of the median income, when you're making about $18,000 a year, you can only afford $340 a month in rent, which means you can find hardly any housing in either Washtenaw County or Ann Arbor. That's a dramatic difference. And we're going to talk a little bit more about who are the people in our community that make this much money, because I think throwing numbers out there is a little dehumanizing. We can't really relate to it. So we're going to get there. But for now, understand the less money you make, exponentially is it harder to find housing. But also what this table tells us is that there's a way that we can focus our energy and our resources to have the biggest impact. And that's by focusing on people who make less than 60% of the median income for Washtenaw County. That's where we're going to have the best impact. That's where we're going to be able to help the most people. So that's where we should focus our energy and our resources. So who are the people that we're pricing out? Well, they're people that we depend upon. They're people that we know. So if you make 60% of the area median income, again, that's about $35,000 a year. The types of jobs in Washtenaw County that correlates to are administrative assistants. Think about all the copies and the faxes that need to get out. Think about coordinating schedules and making sure that people are taken care of in the office. Truck drivers, COVID-19 has made very apparent the degree to which we rely on the logistical operations of our trucking industry. And the people who actually deliver those goods, they can't afford to live here. Payroll clerks, people who make sure that we're all paid on time and accurately, who take care of our benefits, they can't afford to live here. As we go down to 50% of the median income, we have food prep supervisors. So people who are making sure that food at bulk is prepared well, people who are working in our grocery stores. Pharmacy technicians, people who we all depend upon for our health and well-being. Medical assistants, more and more relevant as the industry as the medical industry gets tighter with not enough qualified professionals. And construction laborers, the handy people that we call when we need help, the folks that we depend upon to build all of the real estate that we live in and that we buy from, etc. And then finally, down at 30%, about $18,000 a year, we have dishwashers, cooks and bartenders, home health aides, childcare workers. Again, people who we depend upon every single day. What would our thriving restaurant industry be without dishwashers, cooks, and bartenders? Home health aides. Our elderly population is going to double in the coming decades. And many of our residents already rely on home health aides. These are people who are commuting over an hour to get to work every day, who we depend upon for our help. Childcare workers. Our community is full of parents and grandparents. I grew up in Ann Arbor. Ann Arbor is my hometown. The people who we entrust to care for our kids can't be our neighbors right now. So the bottom line is, we can't be the inclusive community that we say we are and continue to exclude so many people from housing. And I say that we want to be an inclusive community. I truly believe that. I'm so proud of my hometown for the values that it holds dear. However, without giving people the opportunity, not necessarily the right, but the opportunity to live here, we're building a wall around our community. And that's not right. And that's dangerous for the survival of our economy. So I don't want to be all doom and gloom. I want to create a sense of urgency. I want to make it very clear and apparent that there's work to be done, and it's important work, and it needs to happen now. But there are real tools that we're using and we can continue to use to further that impact and to make the situation better. The first I want to talk about is housing supply. So Ann Arbor has a huge demand for housing, and that's illustrated by a few key numbers. First of all, and we're going to look at this all through the lens of what's happened in the last 20 years since the year 2000. So the University of Michigan, which is our largest employer, has increased its student enrollment by 10,000 new students in the last 20 years. That means compared to the year 2000, 10,000 more students come onto campus every fall, every year. That increase of 10,000 people entering our housing market has had a dramatic impact. Also, when you take into account the fact that the University of Michigan has changed its enrollment strategy to focus and really try to build the out-of-state and international network of students who have much deeper pockets and can afford more expensive housing, that's created greater competition for current residents, permanent residents, who now can be outbid for housing much more easily. The other major impact is the fact that our economy is growing. We've added about 12,000 new jobs in the last 20 years to our local economy and to our local community. And that's created an effect in which 80,000 people, Monday through Friday, commute into Ann Arbor every single day. We're a city with a population of about 120,000 people, about 40,000 of whom are students, which leaves about 80,000 permanent residents. Our population doubles every working day as people commute into town. First, I think that's a symptom of an undersupplied housing market, that people who work here cannot have access to housing or the affordable housing that they need. So they're forced to commute from outlying areas like Ypsilanti closely, like the townships closely, but also as far as Plymouth, as far as Brighton. And we even hear stories of people commuting over an hour from places in Ohio. So the net impact has been the increase of about 22,000 new people to our community through increased enrollment and through new jobs. And that's created a lot of demand for housing. But our supply has not kept up. In the last 20 years, we've only created 3,250 new housing units of every expense. Now, housing units can be a little misleading. So, multiple people can live in a housing unit. So that 3,250 represents about 8,000 bedrooms. So the net impact to our housing market in the last 20 years, 22,000 new people, 8,000 beds. Where are the rest of those people living? Well, if they're affluent enough, they're displacing community members. If they're not affluent enough, they're living in far-flung areas and commuting far distances to get their education or to get their paycheck. So one of the strategies is to build more housing of all expense levels. By building housing that's of a higher rent, we're able to give our newer, more affluent residents access to housing, and we decrease the competition for the current housing that we have that the rest of us need. And by creating housing that's more affordable, we give greater access and opportunity and choice to the people like the rest of us who are trying to access the housing market. The next way that we can tackle affordability is through incentives. In the state of Michigan, two of the most useful tools to combat an affordable housing crisis are called inclusionary zoning and rent control. Inclusionary zoning is a concept that says to the developer, you're going to build 100 units of housing. X% of those have to, under law, be affordable for a certain demographic of people. Maybe it's the elderly, maybe it's people of a certain income, maybe it's veterans. Rent control says if your building was built before the year, say 1979 as an example, your rents can only increase by X%, which limits the landlord's ability to jack up rents and drive people out. Those tools are used in most major metropolitan areas in the United States as a means to create a greater amount of housing in both new construction and existing buildings. And it puts a little more pressure on developers and landlords to create more inclusive and affordable options. Now in Michigan, those are illegal. However, in 2018, the state of Michigan made it explicitly legal to incentivize a developer to incorporate affordable housing into new development. And this is one of the things that I've been most proud of and most excited about my tenure on city council, was jumping on that change in state legislation. We worked with the Planning Commission to devise a new set of incentives about how we encourage developers to build the kind of buildings we want to see in our downtown area. So for the last 10 years, before 2019, our downtown development was really impacted by a set of incentives that were far-reaching and somewhat easy to achieve. And I think they served their goal. And so now it was time to revisit it. In 2019, we said, what are the two priorities our community has? A, we're facing a housing crisis and we need more affordable housing. And B, we're facing a climate crisis and we need greener, more energy efficient buildings that produce less carbon. So we really focus the incentives on those areas. On the affordable housing side, which is the meat of the work that I got to participate in, was we stripped back the really easy to achieve incentives and we created 3 tiers of incentives that give developers the ability to build taller buildings with more density if they incorporate increasing levels of affordable housing into their projects. Essentially, it gives someone who's investing in downtown real estate a little more bang for their buck if they also give the community what we need in return. And that's the best we can do legally, and I'm proud that we made that change to respond to changing market needs and community values. The last way that we can impact affordable housing in Ann Arbor is through direct construction. There's nothing more direct and impactful than just building housing and limiting the rent because we have control over it. So in the state of Michigan, we can only control rent if we have an ownership stake in the land that's involved. So building the housing ourselves is really important. And I'm gonna spend time talking about direct construction for the rest of our time together because that's where we can have the greatest impact most immediately in the lives of individuals. The pictures you see here are simply examples of renderings or actual buildings that the Ann Arbor Housing Commission has been able to build in partnership with organizations like Avalon Housing, the City of Ann Arbor, and groups like them. So before we have any business building new housing, it's important that we care for what we already have. I think there's an old wisdom and a financially responsible way to administer your assets and your money that says take care of what you have today before you invest for the future. So in 2013, our Housing Commission properties were in rough shape. And I'm going to talk about the Housing Commission most in particular because it's the entity that the city of Ann Arbor is most immediately responsible for. It's our affordable housing entity. And so we got some really great new leadership into the Housing Commission through our executive director, Jennifer Hall, who's an absolute hero and champion and so absolutely good at what she does. So in 2013, we had really pressing needs. We had $65 million worth of desperately needed repairs. And that was across 355 units of housing over about 12, a little bit over 12 different properties around town. And the problems were pretty critical. There was asbestos, there was mold, sewage issues, HVAC issues. I mean, these weren't the kinds of properties that we would choose to live in. And also the property that's pictured here was at White and Henry, right across the street from the Salvation and the CVS on Stimson, right near our football stadium. And it's certainly not the message of how we want to communicate our values that our most vulnerable neighbors get housed in projects like this. So we did something really great about it. Over the course of the next 7 years, we embarked on a mission to rehab and rebuild every single unit in our public housing system that's administered by the Housing Commission. We also increased the number of units in that same process by 45, thus increasing our entire stock of affordable housing. And we also remodeled the new developments with a really modern architectural style that creates more community. So we have townhouse styles, we have front porches, we have community centers, we have playgrounds. Instead of the more 1960s to 1980s style project apartment housing, where doors face interior hallways and there is less of a sense of community. We want to create thriving neighborhoods, not just maximize the number of units that we can fit onto a parcel of land. So we were able to do this really excellent work. Partly because we had tremendous leadership from Jennifer Hall, and also because we were one of 10 communities selected for a federal pilot program to test out a scheme and an idea that the Obama administration had for how to create greater public-private partnership in order to improve affordable housing. And so we were actually able to do all this work over the last 7 years using very little local tax dollars. Very little property taxes. We actually really mostly use federal dollars and private equity. And so by leveraging private dollars and federal dollars, we limited the impact to the local taxpayer, and we're able to really revolutionize our public housing properties quickly. So now it's time to invest for our future. And we have really real and pressing needs. I hope we established that clearly in the first part of this conversation. To take the next step and to invest in our future, we've identified 10 publicly owned properties. That means the city of Ann Arbor is the owner. Us as a collective, a community, own those properties. And we've determined that these 10 are viable for affordable housing. That means they're viable economically and financially, as well as environmentally and structurally. So we can build housing on these 10 properties. And they're scattered around town, and they're also clustered in our downtown. And the reason that they're so dispersed as well as concentrated in downtown is affordable housing works well when it's integrated into other neighborhoods. We don't want to just create poor neighborhoods and rich neighborhoods. We want to create neighborhoods where all types of people can walk down the same streets, can bike down the same streets, can enjoy the same parks and community centers, and make sure their kids go to the same schools. That's when affordable housing works really well. And that's when we really create economic mobility across generations. So building on those 10 properties, we'd be able to go from our 400 units of affordable housing in the city's stake of affordable housing today. We'd be able to build 1,200 units of affordable housing by the year 2041, increasing our supply to 1,600 units in the city's supply. Other partners like Avalon Housing, Michigan Ability Partners, Habitat for Humanity, they'd still be able to expand their portfolios as well. This is for the city's role. That 1,600 units of housing would make a huge impact on the lives of thousands of people and really help make our housing market much more stable, resilient, and workable for a lot more people. So it's not just enough to have the land. The land helps a lot. It decreases the time it takes to acquire land, and it brings down the costs by tens of millions of dollars. But building is super expensive. And so funding is a critical conversation that we have to have, and we need a strategy for it. So we're going to be able to raise about $450 million. That's a huge amount of money through really creative and innovative mechanisms. First is federal and state grants, tax credits, and loans. These are low interest ways to collect cash upfront to fund the construction of new development, in this case, affordable housing. They're either low interest loans or they're grants that only require our sweat equity. And these programs are administered through the federal government and the state government, entities called HUD and MISHDA. And our local experts are really top notch at applying for these programs. And we are, as a city, are very competitive in receiving them. So that's great opportunity. Again, low interest or just sweat equity. The next is revenue bonds. And this is a really creative way. This would be the first way that we apply this funding mechanism to access low interest loans. So a revenue bond is money that we can borrow because we have an income source, a revenue source. And we do here because we'll be renting these units and be collecting rent from people. It'll be differing rent depending on how much money they make, but we'll be creating rent. And that allows us access to a different kind of bond. Most bonds you hear about are completely taxpayer funded. We borrow money and then the taxpayer pays off the loan through their property taxes over time. In this case, the taxpayer simply backs the loan. And really what's paying off the loan is the rent that we would be collecting. And we know we have this incredible demand with 80,000 people commuting into our city every day and thousands of people applying for affordable housing and not being able to get to it. And so we know that that rent and that income will be stable over time and allow us to pay down that debt. And these revenue bonds have really low interest rates, which will allow us to reinvest that money that we would be paying on debt service into creating more affordable housing units. This revenue bonds are something that we use in situations like our water utility. So if we were to replace our entire water treatment plant, it would cost $180 million. We don't have that kind of cash in our water utility right now. So what we would do is we would borrow that money through a revenue bond, and the water customers, you all, would back that bond and pay it off over time through your water bill. We get a whole new set of infrastructure that makes sure our water is safe from PFAS, from dioxin, and from all the other contaminations that exist in our environment. So we get great tap water, and you all pay it back over time, over the course of decades. So that's exciting, that's innovative. We haven't done that with housing yet. The other way is we're gonna use county public safety and mental health millage dollars. So the voters of Washtenaw County approved a millage for public safety and mental health at the county level. So to the sheriff's office and to community mental health administered by the county. And because the city of Ann Arbor has our own police department, we get a rebate of $2.2 million every single year because we don't rely on the sheriff's services very much. And of that $2.2 million, we're going to be investing 40% of that into affordable housing, building new construction of affordable housing. And so that translates to just under $1 million every year that we can dedicate through that source. The next is the Downtown Development Authority. Some people know them as the DDA. They're a separate taxing entity that exists under the umbrella of the city of Ann Arbor, but focuses their attention on just the downtown district. And they're realigning their mission and their focus and their priorities over the coming decades, from creating a really beautiful, very sophisticated streetscapes and infrastructure like we've seen over the last couple decades, and turning their focus to helping us to achieve our affordable housing goals. Just because they see downtown as everyone's neighborhood, and so more people should have the ability to live there. not just people making a lot of money every year. And then finally, we sometimes get contributions from private developers. So there are certain situations in which we require a payment from a private developer into our affordable housing fund in order to allow them to do whatever project they're interested in. And when we can collect that money, we will collect that money. And so that can range from $75,000 that a small developer pitches in, and that can range to $2 million that we get for a large scale transformative real estate development, like the one happening on the old DTE Mishcon coal gasification plant, where they're reimagining the waterfront there. So all of these pool together to be about $450 million over the course of 20 years. And so we're being really creative to earn money through our creative minds, as well as our blood, sweat, and tears. However, there's still a $58 million gap to complete the construction that we want to across these 10 sites. So we can do most of it, but there's still that $58 million. And that's why City Council unanimously put Proposal C on the Ann Arbor ballot for November 3rd, 2020. It would be 1 mil, and we'll get into what that means for you as an individual. That's the amount of tax we're asking for. And it would raise $160 million over 20 years, so between 2021 and 2041. Now, City Council put this on the ballot unanimously, and I think that says a lot about the real need that it's solving, the tangible plans that we have, and the very precise purpose with which we'll spend these dollars. So what does 1 mil mean? $160 million, that sounds like a lot. But when we boil it down to the individual household, it becomes much more approachable. So if you just bought a $350,000 house, about the average in the city of Ann Arbor, if you just bought it yesterday, your taxable value would be half of that, which is $175,000, which means the city and the county and all the other property taxing entities like the school district use $175,000 as your taxable value, and that's how they use equations to figure out what your property tax is. So how would Prop C impact that? Well, for 1 mil, which Prop C would be, you would only pay $175 a year. Or if you rolled that into your mortgage, just $14.58 every single month. So very approachable, small scale expenditure at an individual household level that has this huge impact on a lot of different people's ability to call Ann Arbor home. Now, the picture, that financial picture, becomes much easier and much softer if you've owned your home for a while, because of the Headley Amendment in the state of Michigan and the state of Michigan's Prop A from 1994. Property taxes actually usually decline for people who have owned their homes for a long time, especially if you owned your home before the 2007-2008 market crash and global recession. Your tax impact would be much lower than this. This is for someone who just bought their house. So, small financial impact, huge ability to grow our housing stock, our affordable housing stock. Now, you'll remember I said there was only a $58 million gap that we were trying to fill. And this is $160 million. So you might be asking, what are you going to do with those other $100 million? Well, we want to go above and beyond. So since 2015, the city of Ann Arbor, through the Housing Commission, has only increased its housing by 45 units. Other partners like Avalon have been much more successful, but the city of Ann Arbor has had limited success, and it's mostly been through that rehabilitation, through that federal program, shepherded by our leadership at the Housing Commission. Now, if we were able to pass Prop C with those tax dollars, we would be able to build 1,500 new units of affordable housing over the next 20 years. Now, you'll remember I said 1,200 units on those 10 properties earlier. Well, this allows us to build 300 more. And it also helps us fund the long-term maintenance of those units, so that not only are we building them with the initial capital, but we're taking care of them so we don't get into a position like we were in 2013 ever again. And because some tenants will require added supportive services like after-school programs or mental health support or employment counseling, we're also going to be able to fund a certain level of that, those same tax dollars. So what you get is 1,500 units of housing, but more importantly, what we get as a community is 4,500 new neighbors. Neighbors who wouldn't otherwise be able to live in our community, to chase their academic goals like Charmaine was able to through her housing at Avalon, to chase their dreams of being an entrepreneur, to contribute to our community and the fabric of our society and our economy in unique and creative ways. Ways that honor them and make our lives better and more interesting. That's 4,500 human stories that we can make better and brighter through safe and secure housing. So I hope you'll join me in voting for Proposal C on the Ann Arbor ballot anytime between now and November 3rd. If you have any questions, you can always reach out to me. My contact information is available on the City of Ann Arbor's website. I'd love to talk to you about affordable housing, what successes we've had, and what the next chapter and journey looks like. Take care and thanks for watching.